Hi, I'm Michelle Alterkin, and I work in the Center for Counseling and Psychological Health, CCPH, at UMass Amherst. And I'm going to speak to you today about um, well-being overall and systems that I believe impact our well-being. And I'm going to look at it through a lens, an anti-oppression lens. So am I going to say all the right things? No, but I'm going to do my best, and that's all we can hope for. And so right now I'm going to start screen sharing with you. And the way that this is going to work is that I'm going to pose different questions to you, and I'm going to ask you to pause the presentation as you need to in order to answer those questions. I believe the questions will help you delve a little deeper into your own experience so that what you get, the takeaway that you get from this presentation will be individual. Okay, great. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was how judgment operates within our society. What my experience growing up was basically do whatever I could, act however I could, behave however I could, do whatever I could to fit in. Because if I fit in, I would finally feel all those warm and fuzzy feelings that I was looking for. And I was taught that if I remained kind of on the outside, whatever my different identities were, that if I remained on the outside, I wouldn't ever feel good. So that the solution to that, I was taught, was to change myself. This is super problematic. And the first question I want to ask you is, what are the different identities that you hold? And so if you want to pause the video, what are the different identities that you hold? And then I'd like you to ask yourself, what are the ways that you have attempted to change yourself so you don't fall into those stereotypes, the stereotypes that exist about those identities? So I guess to share a little bit about myself, I was always a tomboy growing up, which I now know is a pretty messed up term. Now I can say I identified as on the more masculine side of the gender spectrum. But when I was younger, the language was tomboy. And I learned that that wasn't exactly acceptable, that nobody would want to be my friend and nobody would ever want to date me because boys just wanted to date feminine, normal girls. So I learned pretty early on that I had to shift myself to be accepted. And I was doing this not just shifting my gender identity, but shifting my sexual orientation, shifting different identities that were important to me in order to be liked and not judged. But it ended up, this last question I'm going to ask you to think about is, how did doing that make you feel? And what was your experience with that? So again, just pause the video and take some time to think about that. I know that for me, it made me never feel like I was good enough, that there was nothing besides continuing to kind of change and adapt, and then people would finally like me. But I was getting further and further away from who I was, so I was becoming super inauthentic. And I don't know whether I was faking it really well or if people could see through it, but a lot of the friendships I made when I wasn't being true to myself have not lasted. And I think that the reason we try to shift ourselves is because of the society that we exist in. That this is where I'm going to get kind of messy a little bit. But we have been taught to fear who we are based on how others respond to us. I remember not seeing myself reflected in the media. There were very few queer characters. And as a Jewish person, I also remember there were a lot of really negative Jewish stereotypes that were being portrayed by the media. So I remember learning, like, don't be too much of anything. Don't be too Jewish. Don't be too masculine. Don't be too loud. Don't be too anything. You name it. And there were other parts of me that I was taught, if people saw those, you could be in physical danger. And a lot of that was passed down based on what my family had been through. So a couple things about me, and these are obviously very complex identities, so we're not going to get into too much detail, but I want to share with you that I'm an adopted person, and I also have older parents then who, my parents, I don't call them adoptive parents, but my parents then happen to be older. And I'm 30, and my mother happens to be 75 years old, and my father happens to be 81 years old. So when I talk about older, I mean, there's a generation that was skipped. And so my parents, based on their experiences, and I'm sure your parents as well, really had to be fearful of certain identities that they held. My father is from Lithuania, and he was born in 1938. And so that is right at the beginning of World War II. So he is a Holocaust survivor, and he learned from the moment he was born, and in his genes, it's something that impacts our genetics, that his life was at risk. And he spent years trying to find safety from persecution and oppression. And so he learned, you know, being Jewish is something to be proud of, and it's also something to keep in mind that other people might oppress you or try to kill you. Or so my parents took this mindset with them of fear, that there were things to be fearful of, and they had good reasons to fear. And what I think that it contributed to is there were certain things that, in my experience as a white person with tons of privilege, different financial privilege, white privilege, ableist, you know, body privilege. I'm trying to be articulate here, but all these different privileges that I hold, that they taught me to kind of ignore those, like not be aware of those privileges because of the history that we had experienced. And so I've had to, through my life, realize, yes, there are certain things that I do have to be afraid of, and there are certain things that my parents experienced that I don't necessarily have to be afraid of in the same way. And this is just my own lived experience. There are lots of Jewish people that are afraid for their lives on a regular basis. It really depends on where you live, what part of even our country you live in. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that there's experiences that are passed down to us that we should be afraid to show certain parts of ourselves. Like, my parents didn't want me to come out because they thought that that would put me at physical risk for my safety. And there were ways that you have to balance that for yourself. Those are individual things that each of us has to balance for ourselves. So each of you that I'm speaking with today, you have to balance your safety with your self-expression. And nobody can make those decisions for you but yourself. My parents meant very well when they were trying to protect me, and they were also operating out of fear. And so finding that line of what do I need to be afraid of versus how is society trying to control me through fear? And I think that's something all of us have to reckon with. And that's why I'm speaking to you now. And even though it's very challenging, I think it's important because I don't want to live in fear. And that's something I have privilege to be able to say. So I guess these next questions on this page, what parts of you have you kept private for fear of how others would respond. And so just pause the video, take a little bit of time. And then this is a little bit of a different question, but how does fear operate in your individual family? I spoke a little bit about how fear operated in mine, but there's a lot of different ways that fear can operate. For some families, there are individual family members that make other people feel scared, that create tension, that have very intense anger. So just to think a little bit about, how does fear operate in your family, and how does fear operate in your friendships, and kind of how does each of those impact how you operate in the world? And what I've learned is that the system that we live in, and when I talk about the system, I mean our government, capitalism, white supremacy, sexism, any of these systems that pit us against one another, they create something called scarcity theory, which is this idea that there isn't enough to go around. And what scarcity theory does, or having a scarcity mindset, what it does is it makes us think there is such a limited amount of resources, and that if I'm not perfect, if I don't do everything that society expects of me, I won't have access to those things. And it makes us fight amongst one another. We start blaming other marginalized groups for blocking our access to things. And I think fear within our families operates in that same way. That when we're thinking about survival, if there's only a small pot, only a small amount of resources, our families want us to have access, to protect ourselves, and to be able to have the future that we want. So they've been taught, in order to adapt to the pot being so small, we have to judge and keep ourselves separate from everyone. If there's a behavior that we think will prevent our kid from success, we are going to demonize that behavior. If we think a whole certain community could potentially derail our kid from having success, we will demonize a whole community. We will demonize Black people. We will make Latinos, Latinx folks feel unwelcome in this country because we have this mindset that there isn't enough resources. And when we do that, it makes us really cruel, judgmental, and mean. And it creates really unhealthy dynamics within our families. So when I think about fear, I think about somebody learned to fear in order to try to protect themselves, but it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that we end up competing amongst ourselves when there's plenty of resources. There are billionaires in this world, in our country, that own, let's just call it what it is, all of the wealth, all of the resources. And what happens when we instead get afraid of a specific other group is we focus our energy at being angry at them, or trying to even take more resources away from them, versus the people that actually have all the resources. They've basically shifted our attention to fighting amongst ourselves for scraps, versus understanding that there's a larger system that has those resources. So it's a way of making us scared of one another, making us fear judgments from other people, and then kind of isolating ourselves, which makes it really hard to do the things that we want to do to protect ourselves, because we don't have community and friendship and connection. So this is the part I'm gonna kind of read from what I have here, because I want to be very clear. And it's confusing for me to articulate, so I'm gonna just go for it and do some reading. So we think we must be crazy because we're taught to fear others and judge others. But all that we end up feeling from that is shitty. So we start to think that we as an individual must be doing something wrong and that we must be bad. It's easier to think that than to acknowledge there are systems of oppression. We think, if I could just control myself better, if I could just learn this coping skill and that coping skill, and I could just have a better house or a better car, or a lot of external, if we could get external rewards, I would feel better. And society sets us up to try to go after those things. And while it's really awesome to learn new skills to protect yourself and to grow and to change, by trying to go after those external rewards, you're falling into capitalism. And I can say from my own experience, I thought that if I got a condo, which I did, my wife and I, we bought a condo together. I thought that when I had that, I would finally feel safe and secure. I thought that when I got my dream job at UMass Amherst, that I would finally feel secure, that I would feel taken care of. And what I've actually come to realize is that I'm still scared. I'm still afraid of losing it all. And the systems that are in place kind of keep us one step away from losing it all. So many of us live paycheck to pay rent or to pay our mortgage. And the way that we saved up to have a mortgage and be able to buy a house was we lived with family in somebody's basement for a year and a half to save money. And that was such a gracious thing that a family member did for us. But it connects back to this system that you have to make deep sacrifices to feel safe. And so many of us have had to do that. And sometimes we make those sacrifices and it doesn't even work because, as we've seen from the pandemic, we lose our job, or our loved one who was earning our money gets sick or passes away, or some other challenge comes up. And that's how oppression works. And I am aware, I am not saying I don't have privilege. I have white privilege, which grants me the feeling to feel physically safe every day and not fear for my life. But for Black people in our country and brown folks in our country and people of color in our country, Indigenous folks, they don't get that feeling of physical safety. All of the things that I described for myself, financial security, job security, health, those connect to physical safety, but they're not the same thing. A lot of people don't have physical safety. And we're taught that, as white folks, we were taught that the reason we don't have access to good health insurance, to good jobs, good things, is because of brown folks, that brown folks are preventing us from having access to those things. But brown folks don't have access to them themselves. So that's actually not the answer. We're taught that if we are afraid and if we judge people, that will make us feel better. And it doesn't. It actually makes us feel worse, and it makes us feel jealous of one another and a host of really negative emotions. And the point I'm trying to make is that we were taught to use fear to protect ourselves, to get a leg up in this rat race. And the truth is, it just makes us work harder against one another, and it prevents us from creating community and creating trust so that we can start working against the systems of oppression. When a system keeps us so tired, so run down and so tired, it makes it feel impossible to create change. It takes away hope. So while these big systems, capitalism, well, it takes away our hope, our ability to hope. And it makes us so scared that we just think, well, it's that homeless person's fault. It's that poor person's fault. It's that brown person's fault. It's that queer person's fault. Our egos are so fragile because we've been taught that these are all individual weaknesses when we struggle. But really, the system is designed to make us struggle, to make us fail. And instead of identifying, well, I guess what I'm asking you to do is to identify that the system is what makes us afraid. It pits us against one another. And I believe that if we could stop hating one another, being violent towards one another, being scared of different religions, anyone that's different, if we could just take a moment and realize when we are divided against one another, it's very easy to continue to be controlled. And that it's very challenging to abandon fear and not let it control you anymore, to be brave and be unafraid of people's judgments. But that's the way that we start working together to create systems that work for us. It's not that I'm a bad white person or that you are a bad white person, but we have been born into a system of racism where I benefit. I benefit because I have access to things that are just good enough to make me think that I'm better or I'm superior, or this is why white neighborhoods do better. And that's intentional by the government and by capitalism. Because if white folks only continue to see it as brown people who are struggling, then we don't want to change the systems. But what I'm asking you is that, do you actually feel good day to day? Or are you feeling anxious to create a future where you can succeed? Because for me, I always thought that if I did the next right thing, I would have access, unlimited access. And acknowledging that if I don't, that means that other people don't, because I have so much privilege. And so I think the thing that I'm trying to articulate is that a lot of folks in our country, and this is going to get a little messier even more, but I'm going to do it anyways. A lot of folks in our country believe that people are responsible for the behaviors because of the stereotype that they fit. And I'm going to argue that pain is what makes us do certain behaviors. So that folks that drink and then they lose their job and then they become homeless, they're then blamed for being homeless. But at the root of it, when they first started drinking, they were in pain and they were trying to cope with it. When folks are violent, I'm not saying violence is okay, but I'm saying it comes from pain. If I hurt you, which is a false thought, but if I hurt you, I won't experience pain, judgment. I will be proud of myself. I will be strong and in control. I will be all of those things that I was promised, that I'm not getting. So it stems from fear and pain, and the interaction of those two things creates violence. And what combats violence is creating a society where we don't judge one another for being weak. We don't judge one another for being emotional. We don't judge one another for having feelings or feeling angry or sad or whatever that looks like for other people. That we don't judge them. And so maybe they don't have to be so afraid. They don't have to hate another group of people to feel better about themselves. It all comes back to love. And when we're denied the option of loving ourselves, it makes it really hard to love anybody else or trust anybody else. And so what I'm asking you to kind of think about is, what are the values that are important to you that maybe you learned weren't good enough, either from your family of origin or from society? Or what are the things that were important to you that you felt like you might be judged for, or that shouldn't be important to you? And I'd ask you to take some time to think about this. And you can, again, just pause the video and think about what is important to you. And then I'd ask you, who are you? And what's important to you? And how can you contribute to making a more just world? Because what we're talking about here is, we've been taught to have an external focus. If I create this thing, whether or not it's good for society or bad for society, I'll feel better, and it's all about me. But if our neighbors, if our people around us are harmed by the projects we're working on, the things that we're doing, we're not being true to ourselves. We know deep down when we're hurting other people. We know it. And we learned, as I shared at the beginning of the presentation, we learned to be afraid of judgments. And those judgments made us forget what was important to us, or put it aside, put ourselves aside. So I really ask, who are you? What is important to you? And what do you want to do to make a difference? And I guess what I'm trying to say, for our well-being to improve, we as a whole country need to think about what our priorities are. If we have a system where at the very beginning of it, we are taught to judge one another, and we are afraid to show who we are, it makes it really hard to be true to ourselves, because we're constantly hiding. And it takes a lot of energy to be hiding. And that fear that you have to hide yourself makes it so that you're afraid of other people, because you're questioning, well, who else is hiding? How can I trust anybody? Gotta sneeze. Excuse me. And what would happen instead if you took all the energy you use trying to protect yourself from judgment and chose to put it towards something else? What would you choose, and who would you help? And the reason I ask you this, and please pause before you hear what I'm about to say, just so that you can identify this for yourself. I remember I learned that I was I don't know how I really learned it. I don't remember where I got this judgment or this message from. Maybe being raised female, even though I'm non-binary now and use they, them pronouns. I think I was taught when I was raised, assigned female at birth, to not speak up because I couldn't be articulate, or I was asking other people for too much, or I was abrasive or bossy. And so it made me kind of lose my voice. And it's going to take me some time to learn how to reclaim it, but I'm doing it right now, doing this presentation for you. People are going to judge me. It's inescapable. But I'd ask you, if you judged me for different parts where I stumbled in this presentation, did you feel good when you judged me, when you created that distance? Did it actually feel good? Because we end up doing that same process to ourselves. And when we're constantly the one beating ourselves up, it means that we leave very little space for growth, change, peace. We don't think we can ever get access to those things. But I've been practicing. I've been practicing self-compassion, and I've been practicing trying not to judge myself or judge other people. And it's given me the strength. I've been planning to record a presentation for 6 months now, since the pandemic hit. And it takes a lot of work to practice being kind to yourself, because we're unlearning something we really learned very strongly. But what would happen if you took all the energy that you use trying to protect yourself? What if you put it towards vulnerability, authenticity? What would you choose to do with it? How would that actually empower you? And this next question, how would helping this population or helping yourself make you feel? I can say for me, this has been really challenging to talk to you about these things, but I also feel super proud. And I think that's the feeling that systems of oppression don't want us to feel. But we all have access to feeling proud of ourselves. If we can create step-by-step expectations of things that we can reach, not externally, but internally. Like, I want to be kinder. I want to be in the moment as much as possible. And I'm going to use coping skills that I need to when the future or the present or the past become too much. I'm going to use coping skills that I have. I'm going to watch TV. I'm going to have some cake. I'm going to exercise as well. I'm going to talk to my friends. I'm going to talk to family. I'm going to binge on some social media. I'm going to do those same behaviors. But when I do them, I'm also going to say, hey, I think you really needed that. I think you really need kindness, compassion, because I know I did. And if we can develop compassion for us as an individual, that will start healing the world. It'll heal our friendships. It'll shift businesses. Businesses can still be profitable and ethical. I'm not asking you to choose between having a nice car and a nice house. I'm asking you to realize that there's enough resources in this country for all of us to have those things if the super, super rich wanted to help us, and that we all deserve good things. Not some of us, not white people over brown people. We all deserve to feel safe. We all deserve to not be afraid to leave our houses or even be in our houses because we think the police might hurt us, because we know that they do kill people. We know that they kill Black people at a disproportionate rate. than they do any other population. And we have to come to terms with those truths, that these systems only work for some people, and they definitely don't work for all of us. And instead of protecting yourself and saying, I'm not going to feel pain, I'm not going to feel sad, I'm not going to feel hurt, those people deserved it. Instead of going down that route of judgment and fear, allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to be sad, allow yourself to be angry, allow yourself to be discontent, and allow yourself to be called into action. As long as we feel like we can't change the world and like we're the problem and like we're stupid and we're ugly and we're all these things, we're not going to be able to change it. So self-empathy, it's not just for you, it's for everybody around you. And this works to dismantle large systems. So does voting. So please vote. And I'm just thinking about, our society demands perfection. And when we aren't perfect, we're taught we're not worth anything. And that type of attitude prevents us from changing the systems. It's all connected. Sorry, people, it's all connected. So what would you try if you gave yourself permission? And for that matter, what would you be okay with other people trying at to not feel perfect? If you didn't have to be perfect, which please, you don't have to be perfect, but only you can change that for yourself. What would you try? I'm doing this presentation. It's messy, it's real, and I feel awesome. Awesome. And scared. But I can handle complex feelings, and so can you. There's this really awesome video by Brene Brown on Netflix called Call to Courage, and it talks about why we need vulnerability in order to help ourselves. Please go check it out. And she also has a bunch of TED Talks if you don't have Netflix, which are awesome. And I just want to say, if you're feeling scared and you don't exactly know where to start in this process, please contact us at CCPH and come to a couple therapy sessions. And we have awesome groups and workshops and community conversations, Stress GPS, Let's Talk. We have all these places to learn skills and all these resources to help you connect with one another. Because I agree, it's really scary when we're taught to be scared of one another. It's really scary to shift that, to take those risks of being real to yourself and risking rejection. Come do it in a safe place where you can practice. That's what our groups and our workshops offer, among other awesome things, but that's why they're really useful. And other resources on campus, there's programming called Project Connect, and there's Cojourn, and there's peer mentoring, and there's different organizations that you can join. And what organization would you join if you didn't have to save face in front of your friends? What person would you refuse to date because you knew you deserved something better? We have workshops and groups for all of that stuff to build your confidence in yourself, because you are special. And I'm going to take this off of stop the share. See if I could just make it bigger, but you are special and you're worth investing in yourself, because the world won't get to see what you could create unless you have the confidence to do it. And yeah, these systems are really shitty and really hard, and I don't have all the answers, and I'm not calling upon you to save the world or to save me, but I'm calling upon you to we have to step up to the plate a little bit when it's safe to do so, and protect one another, and use our frustrations and aim them where they need to be aimed. That's a bad metaphor. Shift the systems through voting, through collective action, through love and authentic communication, and help people not be so afraid of one another. Give us reasons where we can trust one another. And I believe from that, we can learn to grow, and the future also gets less scary if we're able to be more in the present and make these changes, because then we know we're getting the future we deserve and we are working for. So I just want to end with saying, like, we all deserve really good things, and we all deserve access to safety and higher needs. We all deserve those things, and the way for us to get them is to be authentic and real, express love and non-judgment, and through that gain confidence to take risks and change the world. It was very nice to be here with you today, and please contact us. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, all the best.